Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here at Activate Learn on Twitter. I should come up with a new introduction, but I'll leave that for another time. So today's book review is on Utopia for Realists and how we can get there from Rutger, I keep saying Rutger Hauer. It's not Rutger Hauer, it's Rutger Bregman, who is a Dutch historian. Now this book was translated from Dutch in 2016. And I've got the 2018 English version, obviously. I didn't know who Rutger is, and so I got online and did a bit of a search on his ideas. And as a young historian, I love the fact that he brings history into some of the new ideas that we could be exploring for a future society going forward. Now, Utopia for me is a place, a mythical place, that is where all our dreams come true, that everything seems to work for us. And I kind of think that we should be living in a utopian world right now. After all, we've got our health, we're living life longer, we've got tools and technology that allow us to connect to friends and family all around the world. We've got our work, and yet what we're seeing in the world is something quite different. A lot of anger, a lot of conflict. And I start to think, how did we get to this point at a time where we should be a lot happier with our lot in life? We're not. We're actually, a lot of countries are in conflict. So for the last year or so, I have been reading a lot more about how the world got to this place. What is my place in it, and what to expect for the future. And so I got this book at a Melbourne bookstore along with his new book called Humankind, A Hopeful History, which I haven't read as yet. Now at the same time, I did get Barry Jones' What Is to Be Done, Political Engagement and Saving the Planet, which I did a review of. Now Barry takes on a more Australian perspective of where Australia is at, which was interesting for me given that I am an Australian. But I guess Rutger takes a more global and historical view. Now I actually prefer the history simply because I love history, but I haven't been really delving into recent history, and in particular how the world got to where we are today. And I thought to myself, I've got to start reading more into politics, more into economics, to really understand what were the decisions that drove, I guess, the capitalist view to where we are today. And while reading this book, I was really surprised that some of the concepts that he mentions here, such as the universal basic income, were really not new ideas. I thought that they were new ideas dreamed up by new people, new world order, conspiracy theorists or so forth. Not that I really go for that, but you can understand that the type of stuff that we're reading online could be misconstrued, or you don't know its sources, which in actual fact end up confusing you. So reading Rutger's stories about the historical roots of these concepts of the universal basic income and also reduced work hours, the story of the Luddites and the Industrial Revolution, the stories of how technology has impacted various jobs and people in history, you start to kind of appreciate that, okay, these are not new ideas, but they were somehow thwarted by the governments of the day, or the lobbyists of the day, or I guess the key influences in economics, government and politics to kind of steer us down a separate path. Now in the very last chapter, in the epilogue, he talks about the Window of Overton, which is actually quite new for me. I wasn't aware of it. And the window, he says, is a window of acceptability that is rubber stamped by experts and tallied up by statistical services, and that makes law get into the, well, it makes the law. But basically it says that anyone who takes a very different alternative view from the popular view are considered unrealistic or unreasonable, and therefore a death knell to their politics, which kind of explains why, especially in Australia, we're not really making some really good reform policies about climate change, about future of work, about technology, about things that would help Australia out. And so this Overton window was, again, a new concept for me, but one that is understandable, which might explain why governments are kind of staying the middle ground. In the last chapter, he does talk that the right side of politics seems to have a narrative, rightly or wrongly, but the left seems to have lost its way, and that we are in a position now to kind of define a new utopia, because we haven't really defined what this utopia would be like. Now, whether you're on the left or right, for me, it's no matter. I think we have to have a broad spectrum of different ideas out there and different perspectives. But what I'm finding is those perspectives are not talking to each other. They're not reaching middle ground. They're not kind of working together to form some new ideas, some reform policies that will help us out and tackle with the world ahead. So concepts like the universal basic income, concepts like reducing work hours, although I must admit I love reducing work hours, but I'm looking at it from my lens, which might not be the lens of other people, which I totally get, and that is also something that he mentions here about the cognitive biases that we all have. So what I'm trying to say here is that I'm no expert. I can't say that just because I've read this book, I'm a proponent for universal basic income. I certainly understand it a lot more, and the more I read about it, the more I see that it has value. But what I do also, I guess, think about is whoever comes up with these, the decisions around these new ideas, that they consider the greater good, that they get a variety of different viewpoints, that they test the ideas out, that they think about, I guess, the benefit and value to society and to people in the long term, as opposed to the very few. After all, we've all been jaded by, I guess, the very few getting rich, and then the very idea of the rest of us struggling. So whether you're on the right or left, it doesn't really matter. This really is a great book to read, because it puts some ideas that really weren't new into context and talks about the history, so you could see where we've gotten to this point today. But ultimately, he leaves us with a question that, what is the new narrative? What is the story that we could say from now and here going forward that we've got to do as a society? He doesn't lay out the plans. I mean, obviously he's a proponent for UBI. I'm by the by. I'm kind of keeping an open mind. I'm reading as much as I can so I can understand kind of like the big issues that we've got at play. The other thing I love about this book is I love books that have lots of notes, and he's got heaps of notes, simply because I could then go through the chapters, and if he has talked about a specific topic, I can really delve into further reading into the different research papers and the different articles. So I really enjoyed this book, Utopia for Realists, and how we can get there. It's not really how we can get there. He doesn't lay out a plan. He simply lays out the topics that we've got to start thinking about. One of the big ticket items that I got out of this book is the fact that these ideas aren't new. They're actually old, but we're swayed by the governments of the day, lobbyists, economists, politicians, to go a different tangent. So very worthwhile book, highly recommended. Utopia for Realists and How We Can Get There by Rutger Bregman. Okay then, thanks for listening and watching. Bye for now.